Hi, I'm Ray Gesson with Chimney Sweeps International, and today's topic is history of building codes. So, if you've ever taken a look at building codes and you're wondering to yourself, who made up the building codes and what kind of science have they done to figure out how to make building codes and why are fireboxes 1/4 inch thickness maximum and things like that? Well, to be honest with you, it's more of a throw it to the wall and see if it sticks type of process. So the first building code, it's a 1770 BC, long time ago. It was this guy named King Hammurabi or whatever his name is. I mean, hard to really say his name, so I'm just gonna say that. Sorry about that, dude. He's rolling over in his grave right now. But here's what he said. He had some pretty good building codes, and he was kind of specific. And one of them is that if a builder builds a house and the house falls on the owner, that builder shall be put to death. That's a building code. Pretty straightforward and pretty strong. He also said if the house falls down and it kills a slave, then the builder's got to give up one of his slaves to the owner of the house. You know, I mean, get this one, if it falls on one of the owner's sons, yep, the builder's son gets it. Hey, Dad, why don't you build a better building? Now I'm dying because of you. So flash forward about 1,000 years, and there's another building code that was written. Perfect building code. Do you know why it's a perfect building code? It was written by God. It's Deuteronomy 22:8. It says, a builder who builds a house, put a parapet wall around your roof, because you don't want the guilt of bloodshed falling upon your family if somebody falls off your roof. So why is that a perfect building code? The reason why it's a perfect building code is that it says one thing. It says, if you do this, then you've got to do that. But it gives you a reason. The problem with our modern building codes is that it just does hey, if your house falls in, you're going to be put to death. I'm not really like that, but it just says that, hey, do this, and that's it. It doesn't tell you reasons why. The perfect building code, obviously God wrote it. He tells you why, and that's so important. And that is why I've researched building codes for a long time to try to figure out what people are thinking as they're writing the building codes. They really need to give explanations for them. All it does is give a topic. The inside of smoke chamber shall be poured smooth with refractory mortar conforming to ASTM C199 or something. But the deal is that if they said the inside of the smoke chamber shall be poured smooth because you get a better draft and you get less heat transfer through the walls, different things like that. They don't do that. All they do is just tell you it's poured smooth. Do as I say, not as whatever. Flash forward a whole bunch more years later on. The first chimney building codes I know of, it was in 1666. Great Fire of London come along. Boom, burns down a whole bunch of stuff. It actually happened from a chimney. There was a baker who was baking bread in a chimney, and it caught the house on fire. So how building codes are usually established is that there's a problem, Great Fire of London. And then there's a king or somebody else or authority of having jurisdiction or whoever the guy is thinking, hey, I'm tired of houses burning down. Let's figure out how to make a building code. He says, you shall do this, you shall do that, you shall do this. And people always wonder, there sure is a lot of shalls in building codes. Have you ever noticed that there's a lot of shall maintain a clear incidents? Because the king used to have shall in a lot of his wording because it was a declaration by the king. Things transitioned from the building codes in England, gone forward and forward and forward, and then United States comes along and they're like, hey, let's start building stuff. How do we build stuff? Let's go steal the codes from England. And so all we did is grabbed England's codes and said, all right, what do we got? Here's how to build a building. Ooh, hey, know what? You should angle that roof more, or you should flatten the roof more, or you should do some more stuff. They start adding to different things of the code, trying to figure out what problems are. Usually where that comes from is the insurance industry. The insurance people are like, I'm going to offer you fire insurance. How much does it cost? A lot. But I don't want you to burn your house down, and I don't want to pay out claims. So here's the deal. I'll have you pay me insurance so your house doesn't burn down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out how to save more money by having your house safer. So the insurance industry, it was the kind of leaders of the building code industry. They'd go through and say, hey, you should build it this way. You should build it that way. You should build it this way. And things start happening and things start changing and progressing. Our modern building codes came from essentially 4 different building codes. 1895 or 1896 is somewhere around that. There was a guy who was a sprinkler guy. I forgot his name, but he was like, man, we should have codes for sprinklers. And he goes and meets with his other sprinkler dude friends, hanging out in his house, his dad's house, and says, let's have a meeting. We're going to have a meeting about sprinklers and how we're going to get our sprinkler codes into the building codes. Out of that meeting, there was like 7 people there. They actually formed the National Fire Protection Association. Go figure. A few years later, there were fires in New York. There were fires in Chicago. There were different fires that were happening. And these areas started looking at things that was causing fires, and they're increasing and upping their building codes. They're saying, hey, wait a minute, you've got to have this in the building code. You've got to have that in the building code. And I don't know if I told you, but how building codes work is that even though you write a building code, it's not law. There should really be a federal building code, and they should manage all the stuff. But because our forefathers were very paranoid of the king, called the president, they decided that they would make a 10th Amendment. It's called states' rights. And essentially what it says is that the states have the right that the federal government doesn't. As they were doing the Constitution, no one was a civil engineer, and so they weren't thinking about building codes, and so the federal government doesn't get to delegate or authorize the building of houses and buildings in different states. So that's a state's right. Problem is that the states are like, man, who writes building codes? I don't want to write any building codes. I got enough stuff to do. And so what they do is that these building code organization, it's called model building codes, they'll go through and they'll write up a whole bunch of building codes. And what they really did is they took them from England, and then they started adding to them, and then they're taking them from other states. And they're like, ooh, that's a good idea. I'll take that. And that's a good idea too. That's mine. And I'll take that, and I'll take that, and I'll take that. And they just start combining them, building these building codes. And what happened is around 1925, there was a building, it's a model building code. That may have been either Uniform Building Code or Southern Building Code or somebody. But anyways, there was a 1925 building code. And then in 1941, there was another major building code. And then there's other major building codes. And by the time that the 50s and 60s are rolling through, there's essentially 4 kind of building code type of people going on and doing building code stuff. There is the Uniform Building Code, the Southern Building Code, and Boca National Building Code, and you've got the National Fire Protection Association. There are 4 of them, and they're all going through and they're just doing building codes. And they're like, hey, here's this idea. Every 3 years, I'm going to spit out a book, and you can buy my book, and that way you can build your buildings based on it. The building codes, how they were formulated is that they were kind of formulated in different regions of the country. The West Coast had a certain building code, and why they had their own building code was they were worried about earthquakes. And so there was a lot of earthquake stuff in their type of building codes. And then there was it's a Southern building code. They're probably worried about hurricanes and things like that. So they're kind of gearing theirs towards wind loads and how wind loads affect buildings and things. And then you've got the northern and the northern states and things like that. They've got their building codes, and they're probably worried about snow load and how snow affects things and just different stuff. And then you have the National Fire Protection Association. They're worried about fire burning down your buildings and things. So you've got all these different people working at different kind of specialties. And the problem was that in order to change a building code, you got this great idea. Let's say It's a widget one needs to be put in the building code because no one thought of it and it's just a great idea. So if you go to the building code people, you kind of lobby them at meetings. You go to the meeting and you say, hear ye, I've got this great idea for a building code. That you should really understand it and why you should put it in. And they'll say, tell us what you got. And it's like, you should make it requirement to have this and this because of this and this and this. Great idea, I like it, Bob, let's put it in. That's one. Now you gotta go to the Southern people and say the same thing over again. Hey, got this idea, all this other stuff, I'm gonna put it in. That's a good idea, Bob, I'm gonna put it in our code. And then you gotta go to the West Coast and say, hey, I wanna put the same thing in there. And what the American Society of Civil Engineers had thought of was that, you know what? That's a lot of work. Just to change a building code, you got to go and talk to 3 different people and you're saying the same thing over again. And all you need to really do is take all the building codes of all 3 or 4 areas and put them into one and make it this great building code, the International Code Council. And they're going to have building codes for the entire country, actually the entire world, but so let's merge them all into one, and we're going to have this great building code. And that way you can change it, you get some smart people, you make these great building codes, it's perfect. Well, the problem with that is that imagine saying to all these different companies, hey, why don't you just fold down your company and merge it into one company? You got Sally at HR. She's like, I don't want to lose my job. You got Bill in IT who does the computers. Nope, I don't want to lose my job. And so you're going to try to combine all these different employees all into one. And I'm sure there's going to be some downsizing, and that's going to be an issue. And they're kind of for-profit type of businesses. I believe that there are at least chairmen, even if they're not profit, there's a chairman, and these guys who are running this stuff have got to say, all right, yes, I'm going to do it, or no, I'm not going to do it. And lo and behold, they did it. 3 of the 4, Uniform Building Code, it's a Southern Building Code, and Boca Building Code, they all formed into one, and they said, all right, we're going to do it. National Fire Protection Association said, you know what, you kind of guys are on your own. Hey, we do fire stuff, and so we're just going to hang out and have little fire codes, and it's all good. The other building codes aren't really fire experts, and so they're like, all right, you can do your own thing, and we're going to do our building thing, and we're going to make a code. So the first edition of the International Residential Code came out in 2000. It was work from the International Code Council that started in 1996 and was finally written and put out in 2000. So you'll find out that the International Residential Code had taken the specific codes from all 3 model codes and they kind of combined them into one book. Probably what a good idea is to go through those 3 model codes and study them in depth to find out where they came from and how they translated into the new book. So how I've developed my understanding of building codes is that I went back to the 3 major building codes, followed their timeline of how they were thinking and what they were doing as far as the chimney industry and how they were progressing. And then I took all 3 of those and looked how it got placed into the new International Residential Code. And then I try to understand what the International Residential Code is missing or what they've added. This can seem like a lot of work to some people. Just give me the code and let me be on my way. The problem is that if you don't understand codes, then you're not going to be a master whatever you are. So how I've gained my understanding of building codes, especially the IRC building code, is that I went through the history of all the building codes, especially in the chimney sections, and found out how they changed and formulated over time. And then when the IRC code came out, I found out where and which sections that it was taken from the 3 model building codes to try to understand it's what they are putting in and what they didn't put in. So that helps me to understand the science of chimneys. I told you earlier how God has a perfect building code. The reason is that he tells you the code and then he gives you the reasoning behind it. It's a lot of them don't give you a reasoning behind it. So there's a Bible verse that says that Proverbs 24:3. By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. So what I'm trying to say is that if you can kind of take the same concept, to know a building code, it makes you a great builder. But to understand building code, it makes you a master builder. And it's the same thing with chimney sweeps. I'm Ray Gessner. This has been your training video about history of building codes. Thanks for tuning in.